I'm Maureen Bellatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. This is a special episode of the podcast where this is a live output recording from the 2025 Community Development Society annual conference, which took place in Geneva, New York in July of 2025. So this panel discussion includes myself plus 4 individuals: Gina Lee, who is the coordinator of viticulture and wine technology at Finger Lakes Community College; Julia Hoyle, who is head winemaker at Hosma Winery. She's also the co-owner of Apollo's Praise Winery and La Homa Vineyard, and a member of the New York State Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council. Sarah Gumo is the winemaker at Dr. Constantine Frank Winery. And lastly, but not least, Maya Johnson-Dunn, who's the beverage education manager at New York Kitchen, who has also previously been a guest on the podcast in an earlier season. Our discussion in this panel focuses on community engagement, economic development, and the intersection of young people, women, and the food and beverage industry that's shaping the Finger Lakes region. But we really put a community spin on it because this being the Community Development Society conference. With that, today's discussion focuses heavily on those topics with the unique perspectives from those very talented individuals. Enjoy the conversation. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to facilitate this discussion this morning and make sure that it is the coffee and energy that leads you into the rest of the conference. So I'm gonna, if you can start passing that down, and then I'll give this to Craig. So I'm a big believer in questions throughout, right? So typically in a panel discussion like this, questions are saved until the end. You are welcome to save them to the end. We have dedicated time at the end of this discussion to facilitate questions. But if you have a question as we're going through, I mean, we are going to be sitting up here talking at you, hopefully with you, until 11 o'clock. And so please ask your questions as they come up while we're in the actively in the conversation. So I'm Maureen Bellatori. I'm the founder and CEO of Agency 29, which is a brand building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture. I also have a podcast called Spilled Salt. And so today we are doing a live recording of the Spilled Salt podcast. And so this will be recorded and then distributed on that at some point, probably in the next couple of months. So I'm also delighted to be here with my very talented panelists today. I'll have them introduce themselves going through, and maybe we start with Maya.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maya Johnson-Dunn. I'm the beverage education manager over at New York Kitchen, and I also write about New York Wine for Decanter magazine.
Hello, my name is Gina Lee. I am the coordinator of Finger Lakes Community College's viticulture and wine technology programs here in Geneva.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gomo. I'm an HWS alum, and I'm winemaker at Dr. Frank Family Winery.
And I'm Julia Hoyle, also an alum from William Smith, and I have a couple different hats. So I'm the head winemaker for a winery, Hosmer Winery, that's been around for about 50 years. And then my spouse and I also own a 50-acre vineyard and launched our own winery, Apollo's Praise, about 2 years ago. And because of economic development, I'm also the agritourism person in our regional Finger Lakes Economic Development Council, which is through the state. So
You can keep that. I'm also a huge fan of agritourism, especially because of our work in agriculture. Who is doing anything related to agritourism in your community? I thought I would see more hands. Big, high. Okay, all right. So we've got a couple. Great thing if you're not familiar with it. It's a really interesting sector to dive into. Okay, so I've split this discussion into a couple of different segments to try and keep us focused in, certain areas, and also to help facilitate the questions that all of you may want to ask for something that you're looking to get out of the panel discussion today. So we're going to start with building pathways for the next generation and kind of starting off there of how do we nurture the up-and-comers that are coming along with us as we grow and nurture our communities. And so with that, I'd love to start with some chatter on talent development. How are you creating entry points for young people who might not have traditional agriculture or hospitality backgrounds? What barriers have you had to overcome?
So at Dr. Constantine Frank Winery, we are a little bit more rural than a lot of the other wineries. We're kind of in a further away corner. So I can say that one of our struggles to overcome with that has been just attracting talent, attracting staff because it's so far away. So that has meant that we've had to bridge that gap of young people coming to work in our tasting room or in our cellar and not having previous experience. So we've had to really embrace that and be really forward thinking with our training and with our outreach. So, simple things like posting everywhere, but using social media to post jobs as well as to more traditional platforms has worked well in attracting talent for our cellar team, for example. And we have a really robust training program that creates kind of train the trainer mentality that hopefully keeps people coming back year in and year out, as we have a bit of a seasonal staff during our busy summer tasting room period. So all of those efforts has helped us overcome that, but it is definitely a challenge for us specifically.
So being in a higher education program and being in the heart of the Finger Lakes, which is wine country, first and foremost. We feed the industry even before our students graduate. So they are doing vineyard internships, like right now, our first year students are doing out in the vineyards here within the Finger Lakes, and then they also do a wine internship. So they are here to service the industry while they are learning a trade that's very important to help us.
At New York Kitchen, we're right on Canandaigua Lake, and it is, you all should come visit us sometime. We do a lot of cool beverage education, if I do say so myself. But what we've learned is I live in Rochester, and people say to me at New York Kitchen, I would come here all the time if I didn't live in Rochester, which is funny because I go there every day. And so we've actually found that there's a lot of value in going to meet people where they are, and then that gives them a comfort level and a basis for then coming to where you are, especially in the Finger Lakes, which for some people is a new adventure.
Yeah, so maybe helping people understand that in many of those examples that you just gave, helping people understand that it's not as far as you think it is, or perhaps maybe to better put, it's worth the trip, right?
Yeah, I'll add to that. And additionally, I don't know, when you're hiring, I think one of the most dangerous things an employer can do is to look for the exact skill sets that you personally value. You need to leave room for people to have different experiences or grow in different ways. Right? I know how my brain works. I'm not a traditional learner. And when I was younger, that was challenging at times, depending on the teacher I might have. So as an employer and also someone that has these harvest interns that come in, I want to meet them where they're at. So I've had interns with zero experience, first time in the Finger Lakes. I had a brand new mom last year that, yeah, she had like some childcare obligations, but I was like, that's okay. I can work around your schedule, and I value you wanting to learn about winemaking right now. And I know a lot of wineries might not make space for that, but that person had a great time. They're also starting their own winery. She and her husband, they have a 5-acre vineyard. She now has experience she can bring home. So I think the danger of, saying I value X, Y, and Z, and that is what I want, only that for hiring, can actually impede your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly a willingness and an understanding that you're going to have to train, right? I have also come to understand that the internships, especially during harvest for wineries, is something that happens frequently, right? Like, come on in. We need all hands on deck that time of year anyway, right? Can you speak to that a little bit, the idea of the internships that happen during harvest at a winery?
I think both of us can touch on it some. So yeah, I love to have 1 or 2 people with some experience that I can lean on as a head winemaker, because there's 10 different balls in the court. Some of my favorite hires are restaurant industry individuals because they understand multitasking. and they have a good attitude while they're doing it, and they don't get stressed out if they have a 12-hour day, right? They know that mindset. But that also means they have no idea what is a clamp, a gasket, a pump, what are all of these things? What happens when equipment breaks? And they go, oh, don't worry about it, we'll fix it. Give me 10 minutes. So it's a fun time of year. I also view it as maybe these individuals never work in wine production again, but they understand how wine is made and the people associated with it. And that also matters because they might go into marketing. They might go back to a restaurant and be a somm. You don't know what they're going to do next. And if they had a positive experience in wine production, that will go with them in the future.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit as well. At Dr. Constantine Frank, we're a bit of a bigger winery for this region. So for us, we have maybe more staff than most wineries would need each season. Still, that's maybe only 4 or 5 people. Last year we had 2. It was not enough, but we managed. So we have a combination of that kind of internship status where people are new, they're wanting to get into the industry, get their feet wet. And I really value that as someone who had my first experience that way at Fox Run. So we always try to have a couple of people like that, but we also need people who are really skilled to jump in and hit the ground running and then help us train those newer people. And I like having that kind of different levels of experience to kind of create a learning community. And one thing that I always remember from my time as an intern, I spent the last 7 or so years living in New Zealand and working in the wine industry there. And the winery that I was at for most of the time in Marlborough was called St. Clair. And the head of the company, a very old family-owned winery, he's approaching 90 now, but he would always come out and greet all of the interns on the first day, and there were maybe 35 of us. And he'd say, "You are all now declared St. Clair ambassadors to the world. So after your time here, I hope you have a great time and then go out and represent us to wherever you come from." And so that, to me, always sticks as a great mentality. And like Julia said, if people have a good time, they're going to go home and tell their friends about it, share the wine, say to their other colleagues and friends, "Hey, go work a harvest at this winery. It was great." And then they all become ambassadors, and it becomes this snowball effect.
Yeah, so the importance of a welcoming environment, but also shared experiences, right? That's one of the things I love about agritourism, and why I mentioned that when you made mention of agritourism, is because it's a unique way to have that kind of immersive experience in something, which is a lot of what we're talking about here. When Craig and I created this panel, we very intentionally created it to be a panel of women who are in the regional craft beverage industry. And you've all navigated a career path in an industry that's been historically male-dominated. What is different about the opportunities that are available now compared to when you started? No one wants to take that one?
One of my first experiences, I had a really positive experience. About 2 years in, I applied for a job, and I was asked, "Oh, do you want to work a harvest abroad in the winter?" And I said, "Yes, actually. I'm thinking about going to Australia in the future." And I was asked, "Oh, who's going to take care of your house?" I was like, "Oh, that's cute. I will never work for you." And that's highly illegal. But for me, that was an experience in 2012. I would like to think those questions don't exist. I'm sure they still do with certain employers. But I took that as a reason to make sure that other women and anyone who does not fall into the traditional ag picture of what you envision doing certain work has a welcoming place to work. And I think there's a lot of us doing that, having FLCC, wine education outside of the cellar. I think there's a lot of us trying to build up a community that says you have a place here. And I think we've seen a big shift in who's applying for jobs in the past 5 or 6 years. And we have positions for those people to work. So
I was lucky. I did my internship under a female winemaker who valued my input. But in higher education, most of my staff are men. So when we are out, they'll look at someone else when they have questions about our programming, and then they have to defer to myself. So And of course, they're both taller than I am. So I have to stand tall and really put forth a good effort in being the one to reach out before either one of them answers and has to defer to myself. So it's still a struggle, but I think if we as women together empower each other, then we have the ability to stand and speak for ourselves with a louder voice.
I transitioned into wine in 2020. I went to my first winery in 2016. And as far as I knew, wine was mostly men because that's who I was meeting, unless it was perhaps somebody behind the tasting bar. And to your point of what you were saying, I landed at New York Kitchen because our executive director asked me out for lunch, and we had a really nice conversation, and she knew that I was writing about wine and had interest in educating about wine. And just her taking the time to have the interest in my interests really made a difference for me feeling comfortable moving into the wine industry. Now that I am a writer and an educator at New York Kitchen, I try to make it really clear about all of the opportunities that exist working in wine, because it does feel kind of hard to discover what you could do in this industry if it's not making wine or picking the actual grapes. But there's a ton that you can do. And I realized, thanks to New York Kitchen, that my transferable skills from doing event marketing for big brands actually is exactly what we're doing when we create these educational experiences for people, students, and even, for the wineries themselves that might be interested in hosting classes at New York Kitchen.
I think one of the other things before you pass that mic, Maya, that New York Kitchen does is diversity and inclusion programs all across the board, from cooking with autism to DEI over wine. Maybe you could speak to those a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it's incredible. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so the work that we do there, I think, is really important. We do these cooking classes for kids with autism who really want to have a job but can't find a place to get educated in order to do that job. We found this really amazing group of 11 students that went through an entire semester of sort of a cooking camp, and they had a graduation, and now they actually have true knife skills and cooking skills that they can bring to a job, which has been, it was really amazing to watch. All of them were in class with their parents, so we made sure that they had a space where they felt comfortable and safe, not just from our staffing perspective, but for the people that needed to be around them as well. And it's truly incredible that somebody could kind of concept an idea like that and then bring it to fruition. And then I appreciate you mentioning DEI over wine. It's a program that I founded, and really thankful to New York Kitchen for being the incubator for DEI over wine, which I've now incorporated as my own business. And it is a series that we teach all about diversity, equity, and inclusion over a glass of wine or an NA spritz, whatever it might be. But the point is really just taking the edge off of having these difficult conversations and really highlighting the beverage producers that are doing incredible work in that space to make sure that everybody feels welcome. So we've educated over 150 people at this point, myself and my co-facilitator, Sid Bell, who's out of Rochester as well.
Along that line of making everyone feel welcome, from a regional economic development perspective, I'm curious about how we ensure that young talent and training can actually, the individuals who are going through those programs can actually afford to live and work in the Finger Lakes. And I'm sure that that's true for many of your communities as well, especially when we're thinking about tourism regions where, you've got an ebb and you've got a flow. So I'm curious what you all think about the role that food and beverage plays in creating sustainable career pathways for individuals.
I think it's a really challenging thing for young people because in this region we have kind of I would say just a lower salary bracket than maybe some competing industries in other states. So it can be really hard to attract talent, and especially when those jobs are seasonal, they're not necessarily year-round. It can be very hard to attract and maintain the right talent. So I'm not sure what the answer is there, but we definitely need more funding, more grants, more programs, more abilities for wineries to hold on to people year-round. So maybe that's grants for the wineries. I'm not sure, but I definitely see that as an obstacle.
I think I would also add that there's a need to support local more than perhaps we realize when it comes to New York wine. I don't think you see enough of it in our local restaurants at all. And I helped sort grapes literally for one day. Oh my God. Wine is severely underpriced for the amount of work that these people are doing. And I don't think this is the end all be all answer, but I do think that if there's an opportunity for you to support wineries, even if you heard that maybe it was a bad year, there's, in my opinion, no such thing. There's always a challenging year. And what people are able to do with that outcome is worth supporting financially. And that's going to allow people to pay people a little bit more, perhaps keep their staff a little bit longer. And hopefully that sort of helps the economy overall.
As we've grown in a program, we started in the fall of 2009, and our outreach has grown with that to the surrounding states. And there are more and more students that travel to the Finger Lakes to learn about wine growing and winemaking, and they end up staying here because of the amount of wineries and vineyards that offer the positions that these students are looking for. To go back, some of them do go back because they have jobs waiting for them there. But it's definitely, as you said, we don't pay enough in the industry. And it's most likely our bottle prices aren't up there yet.
I agree.
And I'll speak to that briefly as well. Having your own business and running the winery and dealing with all those numbers all the time. The other thing that on the business owner side that we keep in this balancing act is, there's sustainability in the vineyard, but there's your financial sustainability. What is the bottle price that your local market can handle? Because I can't charge $40 for all of my wines. I'd love to. Rochester would be like, yeah, no, they're 25. I'm good. Your wines might be great, but I'm not doing that. So we're constantly, maybe we have a couple of higher priced wines and you have your core portfolio, but you have to keep financial sustainability for your business in front of mind all the time. And, we're seeing certain areas on the West Coast that they've maxed out what they can charge. They can't charge anymore. And that will be a problem because then they can't sustain, their growing costs. So just something that I keep in mind.
Yep. Before we move on to our next section in this discussion, does anybody have any questions on, we've got one over there, and encourage anybody else if there's any other questions on this concept of building pathways for the next generation. We can kind of take a couple of those questions first.
Go on here, then we'll go there.
So this was honestly to touch on the question about women in the industry. So we're from the University of Kentucky, and Kentucky is, the bourbon capital. And bourbon, and we have quite a few breweries around in Lexington, and it's quite growing. But that is very much like winemaking, a male-dominated industry. And we're lucky at the University of Kentucky, we've got programs with the James Beam Institute to actually study brewing and things like that, which is really fantastic. But how can we encourage and get more women involved and starting into, because I feel like a lot of women are like, I'm just not even going to start. I'm not even going to get into it because it's so male dominated and they feel so defeated before they even begin. So just like you guys in this wine industry, bourbon and such, how do we get the women and young women, especially going into college, how do we bring them in? How do we entice them into this industry that's man dominated to get them involved and really bring those women in the future?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go? I was just going to say, this is one of those instances that I think it's from the ground up. It's a cultural shift. It's having a couple of people that see the value in those women being in their brewery or in their winery. Sarah and I briefly overlapped, but we both worked at Fox Run, and I would say that cellar, that head winemaker who's now since retired, Peter Bell, valued anyone that wanted to work hard in his cellar. And, we were both there for just a few years and then moved on, you longer than I. But I think it's a cultural shift of having a supervisor, an upper level individual that sees the value, and that how that comes about is the nut of the challenge, right? Like that's.
Yeah, I would agree. I think unfortunately it's something that that has to take time because, excuse me, because it is that cultural shift that has to happen. But I can echo what Julia said, that finding those kind of safe havens for women to, to perch and grow and feel safe and nurtured would probably be step one in my mind. So for us, that was Fox Run and Peterbell and maybe a few other wineries who really wanted to embrace young people, women, anyone who was interested. And then that community grew, and the kind of generations now of people who came up through that cellar became, in numbers just as large as the wider community. So it kind of normalized over time, that approach. And then I think other smaller wineries just saw that that was normal now to have female winemakers and just stopped thinking twice about it. But one idea I have comes from my time spent in Marlborough that could maybe help push that change along faster, is they have a women in wine mentorship program. And I'll say as a caveat, having women in leadership positions in winemaking there is really not, it's just not as much of a discussion because it pretty much is 50-50 there. But still, as we know, there's always work to be done towards gender equality. So they're addressing that through a women in wine mentorship. So the few women, or in Marlborough, not few women, who are at those really high levels in winemaking, they sign up to be mentors, young people sign up to be mentees, and they get paired, and they just have a series of meetings throughout the year, and then that kind of becomes a lifelong mentor throughout the industry. So maybe finding who are those, maybe it's only 2 or 3 women in the bourbon industry, and I don't know, maybe they would be interested in starting something like that, and then each year the community grows.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of other things to that too, being, higher education and what others in the community can do that are in municipalities or economic development roles or whatever, is you can highlight the good things that are happening, right? So you can pull out people like Peter Bell, who are great champions for the things that we want to change about the industry, and help, spotlight those stories as great people who are doing good work. Yeah.
Good morning. Brent Hales, work for the University of California Ag and Natural Resources. And one of the things we're seeing in California is the growth of women-owned businesses because they're bringing a value-added concept that has not been there for the traditionally male-dominated growers. Additionally, we're actually seeing a decrease in the number of vineyards. They're actually being ripped out, and that's both for winemaking and for table grapes, because there's a lack of vision, specifically how to, because they've maxed out. That you nailed it when you talked about maxing out the bottle price. So I'd be interested to learn from you, what are you doing, what ideas do you have to do value added, to do something in addition to just putting it in the bottle and selling it?
Well, I can speak for Dr. Frank in that I'm not sure how many of you know about Dr. Constantine Frank Winery, but it's one of the most historic and the most well-known in the region, and part of that is because of the history and that storyline that goes with the winery. And so recently they have really, the management has really clung to that very successfully as a marketing tool, very genuine one, but it's being able to tell that story and working the history of the family into the wines and the way that it's sold, the way the bottles are named, the tasting experience has all been very successful for them. So Dr. Constantine came over from Ukraine in the 50s, I believe, somewhere around there, and started the winery. First vintage was 1962. And so now the winery is still family owned. So currently we're on our 4th generation owner, who is Megan Frank, the great-granddaughter of Constantine Frank, and she's done a lot of that leverage of putting the story more into each bottle and each sale and each tasting experience. So we have, for example, we changed our tasting room experience to focus on Eugenia, who was Dr. Constantine's wife. She created a lot of series around the women in the family. So there's an entire outdoor space called Eugenia's Garden where we do tasting flights as a separate tasting experience option rather than a traditional tasting. She also created the Helm series of wines, which is a high-end single vineyard wine series that also honors the women in the family with that story on the back of her saying, in her own voice. I'm Megan, this is my grandmother's story. So I think that's one way that, we have that luxury as a family-owned business with a lot of history to bring that story. But I think wherever that personal story can be tied in is an opportunity to add value.
So our wine brand is 2 years old. We're both first-generation farmers. I'm from outside of Philadelphia. Kelby did grow up around here. So we don't have that luxury, right? We have no history. We love this region. And the thing that has always been important to the two of us as partners in life and now partners in business is just the joy of it all. The joy of traveling, the joy of a good meal, the joy of wine. And that is what we have focused our brand on, bringing people together. We do these dinners every 6 weeks or so. We max out at 18 people. Come be at our family table with us. We work with different local restaurants and chefs. I don't think we've had a single repeat come to our farmhouse. We have country mouse dinners down at the farmhouse. Sometimes we then have our city mouse dinners, whether it's in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia or Rochester. That's also a city. And so we've just really leaned into what's fun about all of this for us. And I think people can see that it is genuine. And then the long days also don't feel nearly as long for us because we love what we do. And at the end of the day, we just want to share the joy of all of that with anyone that wants to come and visit.
Anything else to add before we move on?
I just think that these smaller wineries here, local to the FLX, have used their creativity to draw on people and to branch away from the traditional wine tasting, to add events, to make it more inclusive, whether it's bringing children or their pets. It's been amazing to see the growth and the creativity. It's wonderful.
Yeah. It really comes down to premium. Did you have another question over there? Okay. It really comes down to experiential and the story, right? So I speak at an international agritourism conference every year called NAFTMA. It was just in Kentucky, actually, earlier this year. And a lot of what we talk about there is the importance of that story because that is the differentiating factor. You just heard it here, right? About the difference between one winery to another is the story that goes into that product. And so with respect to value add in particular, too, I think one of the things about that is change is scary, right? And so it's a scary thing to think about, vineyards being torn out, but value added is also a really valuable thing for farmers to be able to embrace because it allows for sometimes longer shelf life and a different industry, sector to be able to reach and things like that. So it really comes down to the story and a lot of what we're talking about. Question over here.
Just to continue on the theme of diversity and inclusion in the wine industry, I'm not too familiar with the New York wine industry, but in California and Oregon, harvest crews are, very, very ethnically concentrated in one group. And I wanted to know how the industry in New York is bringing greater visibility of the people who do the grunt work as in harvest groups and stuff, and if there is a pathway for them to participate more fully in the industry, to be more visible, and also recognized for the hard work that they do. In case you're wondering, I'm talking about Latino workers.
Okay, great. Great question. I think that's an especially important question with the changing landscape of H5N1 right now, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot packed in there. So my spouse and I obviously have a vineyard crew. We have our year-round workers, and we have, your workers that are seasonal. We have our employees that we've now had for 3 years, but because of paperwork being, it looks correct. I'll say that because I'm up here talking to all of you. There's a new name every year, but it's the same person every year. So, you deal with that as a farm owner. We have been, with the value-added product, we've been slowly trying to build up things like base pay, right? Because we want, now that I have employees, which I never thought I'd say at 35, but now that I have employees that I really care about, I want them to have a comfortable, good life. The people working for us full time, like I know Forlan, our assistant vineyard manager, he loves a tractor. That man will never get off a tractor. He's like, I don't know what you guys do in the cellar, but I like this new air-conditioned tractor, right? That's fine. That's what he loves. But there is also, there are different dynamics in the background there. What are our employees comfortable with spotlighting them on right now? And we have some farm workers that are not comfortable being in the spotlight given the political climate. And that's constantly something we're trying to weigh, I guess is the best way to phrase that. Forlan's had a couple cousins that did not have correct papers and have been picked up by ICE in this region. And that's a really hard thing to, I take that home with me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think currently it's a very scary climate for that work to be done, but it's work that desperately needs to be done. And I don't think we're doing enough personally. But there are some visa schemes called H2A that maybe Julia knows more about, but when I worked at Sheldrake Point, they utilized that visa scheme, which is a more long-term scheme that would allow people to eventually settle and work their way up within a company, and they are a great example of that with some of their long-term workers. But a lot of companies don't want to use that visa scheme because it's lengthy, it takes time, it's more expensive. So I'm not sure what the solution is there either. Probably, again, we come back to funding and each winery needing more funding from the government, from the state, from these local alliances, which we have some of, but not enough.
Like my friends are saying, it's a really challenging time for a lot of people right now if you have brown skin. And it's unfortunate because I do appreciate your question, and I think that there's a lot of value in bringing faces to those people, on your social media, like you would your tasting room manager that you're going to feature because she loves your Chardonnay. So believe it or not, the person in the vineyard probably also loves your Chardonnay and would like to share that on social media too, right? So how do we give those voices a true face if they're comfortable with that right now? And treat them just like we treat our other staff. Why wouldn't we do that? There are a number of wineries around here that are sort of featuring their vineyard team on the websites as part of the team page with everybody else. And I think at the end of the day, it's such a small thing, but it's such a grand gesture that's really important to showing the faces that are really doing this work.
We build websites for clients, and that's a sticking point for us. Something that we always bring up when we're building team pages is that exact point of, you've got 4 senior leadership people right here who all look a certain way in many cases. What do you think about adding other members of the team to this page to kind of show the full, well-rounded team? So great point. Yeah. One more question, and then we'll move back to these.
Yep. Just very quickly, as a Cornellian, I have to ask, we're here next to one of the most famous ag experiment stations in the world here in Geneva. And so the question, I guess, is twofold. One, to create pathways, what's the role of your land grant here in New York and the success here at the lake over from Cayuga Lake? And then quickly, I had the pleasure of being in Stellenbosch, South Africa in 1995, just as South Africa was opening up. And we visited Fairview in Stellenbosch, and wine is stuffy. And when the winemaker came out and said, oh, you have to try this white, we call it bird shit in Afrikaans, because in the tasting notes at a judging that we went to, they said this wine tastes like bird shit. We actually think it tastes great. And so on the label was this bird pooping, which I just carry with me as I think it's brilliant that they brought humor into it to make it available to everyone. They're also the winemakers that do Goats Do Rome. A lot of people know that wine. So what's the role of the land grant, and what's the role of humor, if you will, in order to create pathways for people into wine?
I'm going to pass this down to my friends to talk about land grant, but I will say I do appreciate the role of humor as the person that is writing tasting notes on back of bottles so that you know what you're supposed to be tasting, or writing the review that goes in whatever magazine. I can tell you that's all a crock of shit. Excuse my French, but it is some random person sitting in their house going through tasting panels of wine, deciding what they taste, and now that's what you have to taste. And it's really quite silly, right? We should be open to having fun fun with it and maybe putting bird shit on the label. And that might also bring in more audience to our wineries because it's not going to feel like this thing that you don't know how to talk about anymore. Why not open it up to be very subjective? Because that's truly what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, and as you're passing the mic down, one of the things I've heard too is we, as marketers, we're writing content for websites and social media and that sort of thing. And some wineries are very particular to say we do not give tasting notes because we want people to be able to experience whatever they experience, no matter what that is. And so we don't give tasting notes, or is the policy of some of the wineries we've experienced.
Yeah, and having Cornell in our backyard is fantastic. Around New York State, we have the different regional research stations, and there's a lot of great grape research, microbiology. There's a whole area right here in Geneva that is focused on craft beverage. Having that right there, you know, we know Chris Gerling very well. We all email Chris, or I still bother Anna Catherine, even though I know she probably is like, I'm beyond this now, Julia. But like, we have these people that I just text or email random questions. Oh, I had this weird fermentation. What do you know? And go, I don't know anything. Let's look into it. And they also do have, on the wine side, a smaller committee of us that kind of steer some of their research. I know viticulture as well has this, and on the Vit side, they have in-person meetings around the area with barbecue and beer, because that's how you get anyone from a vineyard to show up. But they'll talk about what's going on in the vineyard in a wet season, what sprays are working, or, you know, when you are doing spray applications, this is ag, there will be sprays that over time will be less effective. And having 20 people in a room say, yeah, I've used this for 15 years, it didn't work last year. Maybe your vineyard is learning that it doesn't want that spray anymore, and then what are the new effective, newer technologies coming out?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can speak specifically to the land grant, but I'm sure that is all wrapped up in Cornell's funding and the ways that they help the industry. And like Julia said, they are really a really central, important part of it through those, you know, vineyard initiatives, but also through their extension programs that pertain to winemaking as well. So it's a huge asset to have these you know, very professional researchers doing that legwork for us and sharing their findings and doing it in a way that's applicable to the issues that we have. I remember in our tasting group that, again, Peter Bell first organized, where we have winemakers from around the lakes come together and taste in a professional setting to help each other out and also just to keep our palates educated together. Those Cornell professionals would come out and do those tastings with us and contribute their perspective from a science background. And they also host a lot of our industry events. Actually, recently we had a big gathering of all the winemakers at Cornell to create a panel, again led by Peter Bell and Maya, to put together a picture of the vintage for a harvest report. So they are constantly part of our community engagement and our professional development.
How many individuals do we have in the room who are part of higher education? A ton. Great. Yeah. So your role too is convening, bringing the right people together. Science, as you mentioned, research, right, is the help for the health of the vineyards.
I have a quick side note, and then I'll pass over to Gina as well. There's a conference we do annually called BEV, Business, Enology, and Viticulture. And to the land grant question, there was a push a couple years ago to merge that with a different conference, Eastern Winery Expo, which is for profit. And it was really important to the team at Cornell that BEV remain a conference about research and that financially it was accessible to everybody because it is a land grant institution. And merging with that other conference probably would have quadrupled the cost of entry and all sorts of other things. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. So I also thought that was a really smart and sort of forward-thinking and long-term decision on Cornell's part.
Thanks for bringing up Bev. Yeah, that's, as a college, our little teaching winery, we literally land lease from the Cornell station here in Geneva. And it has been a huge feather in our cap. We are a feeder system to Cornell, so our students that want to continue on in their education have that pathway to go in. And it's, I don't want to say seamless, but it is for those who have the grades. That's what it takes. It's hard work. But without Cornell doing the research they do within the food and beverage industry out here, these farmers would not have like the help that they need to grow faster, right? Instead of like having to create that wheel all by themselves. We're just fancy farmers. That's, I mean, that's the dirty of it, right? You know, when I have students come in, they're like, oh, you know, they see the wine and, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so romantic. We're farmers, right? We get dirty, we have dirt underneath our nails, but we love what we do. And that sustains the industry here, even though the pay hasn't hit it. But we are bringing in through our tourism, whether it be just wine, but beyond that, our food and all the other beverages, we have found a way to attract the outsiders so that they see the value of traveling from any of the major cities that are around us to come visit this beautiful region and all of the beautiful water that we have here.
Yeah. That's a great segue into our next section, which will be community engagement and regional identity. We'll talk about that for a little bit. You all play a very critical role in tourism and attracting people to this region. How do you balance celebrating local pride while attracting outside investment and visitors? What role does authentic storytelling play in economic development for the region?
I think the story is it. Part of how I fell in love with the wine industry is because I learned the stories of the people that were making the wine. It really wasn't about the wine because I could just go buy Yellowtail for $6, right? It was about the people that were making really incredible products and the passion behind it, the ingenuity that they demonstrate in a really challenging year to create something that is just stunning. And I think that we don't necessarily do ourselves the service of telling the story enough because it's truly so important. So when I'm writing for any of my bylines, my focus is about the heart forwardness of the people that are creating the product because it really just, it hits different. The amount of times a hand touches each bottle that you pick up at whatever your local liquor store is so striking. And I think that it's something that consumers don't know enough about. And there really is a big gap, I think, between the consumer mindset and the people who are making the product. And a great way to kind of narrow that gap is through telling the story of the people that are making it.
If you haven't read Summer in a Glass by Evan Dawson, you will fall in love with the Finger Lakes. And he is a wonderful storyteller, but brought to light what some of these winemakers and these wineries and vineyards have struggled through to get where they're at. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it definitely is a very personal region and one that lends itself well to community building because we don't have a lot of large corporations yet within winemaking. So every business, even one of the biggest, the winery I work for, is still a family business and still small by global standards. That's one of the reasons I decided to move back to this region. Working in Marlborough, I absolutely loved it. But being a more advanced, more modern, more mature wine region, you don't have that sense of, I wouldn't quite call us underdogs anymore, but you don't have that sense of community with the other small underdogs around you that you naturally have in a region like the Finger Lakes. All the winemakers really help each other out. You know, you're out of a product, you call your neighbor, you know, the kind of cup of sugar thing really rings true here. So it just feels different. It's a really big sense of belonging. And I think Maya's right that we need to lean on that a little bit more for our marketing and for telling our regional story. But being a small region, you also need the help of your surroundings as well, the help of your maybe neighborly regions. So I think we do straddle that line of promoting ourselves solely as the Finger Lakes, but also promoting ourselves as New York wine, which would include Long Island, Hudson Valley, other things like that. So it is a bit of a balance, and I think depending on the goal, we work either with those other regions or alone.
No. Unless you want to add anything more about the idea of, it's a balance, right? Of the idea of supporting locals and making the locals feel welcome, and then also making sure that we are attracting the tourists of the region and having your winery be a place where people land when they're coming from outside of the region. Any way that you in particular balance that?
Sure. Yeah, I guess a few different ways. The super obvious one in my life is I'm also a landlord, because why not have something else? And our 4-apartment unit, we have 2 long-term tenants that are both quirky and wonderful, but we have 2 Airbnbs, and it's an old house, and it was built in the 1870s. It needs work. So that's, for me, a really smart model of 2, a little less than market rate units, really great tenants, great relationship with them. And then we also do capture that income from tourists, and that helps fix up the house, which really is, our little corner is a centerpiece in downtown Geneva, and just trying to get that house rehabbed. Then on the winery side, the different price points, right? We have people that will visit us in the summer, and they show up, they want to spend $500. That's great. So we want to make sure that we have that available for them. But then we also have people from our local market that, they budgeted just to buy 1 or 2 bottles around $25 from the 4 wineries they're going to visit that day. And we want to make sure we have that as well. And just kind of building in these tiered systems that everyone can feel welcome to tap in and out of, but then everyone can also find their place.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, that's a really, really well-appointed model that we've also used in terms of our tasting experiences. So being able to diversify your offerings, like Julia's doing with her different bottle prices, we're doing with our tasting room experiences. So we have our traditional, just show up and sit down and have kind of an educated, guided tasting where you have a server who's telling you about the wines. We have that experience for those who want it. We also have the Eugenia's Garden, which I talked about before, which is more casual. It's outdoors. It's walk up to the bar and say, oh, I'd like just a glass of this, or I'll do a flight of that, and go sit at a picnic table, maybe have some flatbreads, and enjoy the scenery. We also have kind of a half a day experience called our 1886 experience, which is where somebody walks you through the history of the winery, of all of the winemaking, pairs that with individually curated little tapas sort of pairings, gives you a vineyard tour, a cellar tour. So we have everything in between at, you can imagine, very different price points. So if you're coming up from New York City and you're doing a whole, day-long experience, great. If you're our neighbor down the street and you just want to come over for a glass of wine in the garden, we have that too.
I think that's a critical key takeaway, is the idea of varied price points that allow something for everyone. So you've got, something that's more simple, and then you have a more robust kind of experience where people can have a premium engagement with the winery, or this can be true for anything, right? We're here for community development. And so there's many aspects of that. We're talking a lot about craft beverage here, but the idea of varied price points to allow for people who are, looking for, so there's something for everyone kind of mentality. Many of you have seen the beverage industry evolve from different vantage points. What innovations are you seeing in winemaking business models or community engagement that are specifically helping the Finger Lakes compete nationally and internationally?
I think the New York Wine and Grape Foundation is doing a wonderful job in assisting the industry and having grants available, small grants for wineries to help with their education and to get their wines noticed in the region and then internationally.
As you're thinking of that, I'll just elaborate on that. She's referring to the New York Wine and Grape Foundation is offering like $1,000 grants right now. And so you can pitch that for, I want to run an ad campaign. I want to, try something new and different. I want to, roll out some new signage, and you can pitch for $1,000 grant.
I mean, we, as a higher education program, have struggled with traditional marketing, right? And if we don't get out of our own way, we end up dying within certain programs. And it's the social media that we have to be adept at and being online. Our viticulture certificate, which we are an intensely hands-on program, all of our classes require the students to be out there and getting dirty and experiencing what it really is to be a wine grower and a winemaker. But we have developed a partnership with an outside marketing source to help us with our social media. And that will help us launch our viticulture online offerings, which is amazing because I couldn't get out of my way to figure out how do we teach an online course that's a hands-on program, right? When we physically can't be there with the students. So it took thinking outside the box. We had to be water, right? We had to flow and move around obstacles instead of being that rock, which was the obstacle and getting out of our own way.
And I believe a lot in organic growth of things. When something good happens, grab on and just run with it. For us, that was 2020. The East Coast discovered the Finger Lakes. You know, the number of people coming up from New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, green space, you could be outside. They discovered a wine region. None of us saw that coming at us, but it happened. And that, you know, that first summer, then summer of 2021, all of the regional wineries saw a huge uptick in sales. Things have settled out now, but we're in a different plane than sort of like what the West Coast is dealing with some of their big brands falling off. We're all pretty small. And then it's sustaining relationships. You know, those buyers and somms that came up from New York City for the first time in 2020 and loved it, getting them back up here or connecting with them on their terrain. I love going to New York City for a couple nights. It's great. So they came up, sustaining those relationships, and the people that in big cities will talk about their story and your story.
Any questions from the audience before we move on to the next section? We got a hand up over here from Emma.
Connecting to kind of a point that was brought up at the beginning about not enough of local cities kind of participating in the Finger Lakes region. Can you speak on how you're doing outreach to, say, like City of Rochester or City of Buffalo or Albany or other kind of predominant cities or even smaller cities like Geneva or Canandaigua to kind of spread knowledge of the Finger Lakes and kind of building the region from within? Because, you know, New York City is great, or Boston or Philly or even East or West Coast, but like I appreciate the New York State wines, but I have friends who've never heard of any of the Finger Lakes wineries. So what are you doing to kind of build those connections at a more micro-regional level?
Should I start? Okay, sure, I can jump in. I mean, yeah, I live in Geneva. I have people that have lived here their entire life ask me where Cayuga Lake is. It's 20 minutes that way, and they really should know that. So to some degree, you run into that and you go, oh gosh, I don't know how to help these people. But that being said, you do, you know, whether it's just in-store tastings that people can come up to you, events at your local farmer's market, restaurant sort of setups where you do a glass takeover. We just started advertising in the Rock magazine, major Rochester-based printed. It is print magazine. I've heard other wineries do radio, like NPR, just sort of morning edition. I'll be listening. I'll be like, oh, Billsboro has an event this weekend. That's nice. So I think just like trying these different outlets, some which are very traditional, but that taps into a certain market. And then, you know, using Instagram. I am not great at Instagram, but my spouse is a super grammer. Like, I don't know how he does it. And people love connecting with him on that platform. So just finding all these sort of traditional and non-traditional ways to connect.
I want to say something that wraps in our Finger Lakes community mindedness along with those goals, which is that I can think of a couple of examples where we band together as a community to then hopefully like infiltrate a city or a market. One of those is actually Julia's spouse, Kelby, who is also a fantastic winemaker who does kind of a lot of that legwork, both personally and professionally, along with Julia. and recently put together a big tasting in New York City where he brought a lot of Rieslings from the Finger Lakes and had a night of blind tasting with, the idea was kind of the best of the Finger Lakes versus the best of Germany, and tasting them blind and seeing, how do these wines match up with some of the best in the world? And we had a great outcome. But Kelby, by himself, just organized this and was representing, 8 to 10 other wineries on his own behalf. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't part of a committee. It was something he wanted to do to promote the region. Another group that has formed recently, maybe in the past 5 years or so, is called Cab Franc Forward, where it's a group where you have a membership. There's maybe 6 to 8 wineries who are members, but any other winery can pay in for certain events that they can be a part of it, where we're kind of promoting, along with Hudson Valley, with Long Island, the idea that Cab Franc is kind of the premier red wine of New York, not just the Finger Lakes, because we all have great climates and terroirs for growing that grape. So we recently had a bunch of events in New York City for that, where we met with internationally acclaimed wine writers and reporters. And we're starting to hear, that people will come to a tasting that might be about Riesling and say, hey, we heard that Finger Lakes also does Cab Franc. Can you tell us about that? So those community banding together efforts really, I think, have made a difference for us.
I think you nailed it, Sarah, about community. When I came into this industry, what shocked me, actually blew my socks off, was the amount of sharing. Like going to your neighbor saying, my tractor broke down and I can't get it fixed for a week, and no problem, right? This is your competitor, technically, someone who is selling wine right alongside you, and wouldn't we all love to outperform our neighbor? But if we don't help our neighbor in being successful, then this industry as a whole starts to fail. And that is where I've noticed when I've gone out to promote our programs within different states, I come back thinking, oh my gosh, these wine growers here in the Finger Lakes have got it going on, because they work together, they're constantly meeting, and there's no decisiveness, right? They want to help each other, where I don't see that in the surrounding states yet. Jersey's moving that way. Pennsylvania has some little outspurts, but I don't see it in some of the smaller states. But the partnerships that are formed and helping each other, like watching, a winemaker at a winery, Anthony Road Wine Company, right? Johannes, when he was there for years, he bought land right across the road from them, and they were happy for him. And he stayed on to help them out, but now he is off on his own. And that's amazing, right? It's just like watching your child grow and succeed, because the better that he does, the better that everyone around him does, right? We're just lifting each other up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, I was just going to mention rising tides lifts all boats, right? And so I think what higher education institutions can do, what anybody who's working in community development can do, is to facilitate this and kind of nurture that kind of collaborative mentality, because you're absolutely right. The Finger Lakes, I think agriculture in general tends to have a collaborative nature about it, right? I grew up on a dairy farm, and so I grew up with the idea of, your farmer broke and your neighbor helps, and vice versa. The borrow a cup of sugar kind of mentality is really common in agriculture, but it's common in healthy communities, right? And so what we can do in the industry is help facilitate that collaboration in your community. How can you convene people together to do information sharing like this? You can easily do that within your own community. Any other questions before we move on? We've got one over here.
Hi, my question's kind of a two-parter, but I would really like to know how you guys go about kind of teaching and sharing the appreciation of the wine and of the story with people that are younger. I want to know kind of what would draw my eyes to not buy the $6 bottle of wine, but to splurge for the $25 because of the story and all that goes into it. Because I do think young people crave that kind of connection, but we don't, it's not super popular. And then kind of the second part would be, how do you guys think our social and cultural appreciation of alcohol as a whole in the US affects it? Because there are people that just kind of want to drink to get drunk. And then I want to know what you guys would do to foster the sense of appreciation to the younger generation.
Great question.
I appreciate your question. At New York Kitchen, I teach a class called Wine for Normals. It used to be called Wine for Normals, inspired by the podcast Wine for Normal People and book. And then I taught it at RIT, so we took it into Rochester, and the students at RIT told me that I should rename it Wine for Normies. So that's what it's called now. And this class it's 5 wines, all New York. I pull them straight from our 100% New York State tasting room at New York Kitchen. And we go through why you taste things the way you do, literally how to hold your wine glass, how you smell wine, what you're doing when what's coming up for you when you smell the wine. I make people talk to me about the wine in that class. We have a lot of awkward silences until about the 3rd wine, and then people can't stop talking. But the goal of it is just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable with the product. There's no wrong answer. And when I was learning how to talk about wine, that's what it was for me. It would just be my husband and I outside on the porch talking about why something tastes the way it does. And everything I would say would sound very crass, but it was getting me to a point of just being comfortable talking about the product. So I've done now Wine for Normies at RIT 3 years in a row. They have a program called After RIT, which is all about educating the students about the unwritten curriculum of life. And believe it or not, that does include ordering wine at a bar. And so I can teach them how to understand why this $25 Riesling from Apollo's Praise is worth every penny compared to the $6 Yellowtail that's always going to taste the same. And do not get me wrong, that is a feat in and of itself, that wine always tastes the same. But there's something really beautiful to be said for the work that people in New York are doing to make the best out of what any year gives them. That's why we're so proud of our sense of place up here in the Finger Lakes. It's one of my favorite classes to teach. I do it a couple times a year at New York Kitchen, and not just for students, but for adults who want to go to the liquor store and feel comfortable asking for help when they want to buy a bottle. So I think it's more about just the more that you do it, the more comfortable it becomes. And so that just kind of has to be a thing that you practice to some degree.
So as you're continuing, I just want to add something to that because we keep talking about the Yellowtail, right? So Yellowtail is a very inexpensive bottle of wine that is produced by Gallo, and it's made, there is a winemaking facility here in the region that makes that. And so I interviewed that winemaker, his name is Matt Schrader, on the Spilled Salt podcast. And so you can look that up, just search for his name. And one of the things that he talked about with, the $6 bottle of Yellowtail is that also plays an important role in the industry, right? Because it's approachable. It is easy to make that $6 choice of the bottle. So to your question of how do we nurture, different people in the industry and have something for everyone, and people who are entering and starting to understand wine for the first time, if they start there, that's okay, and so that gives a new entry point for people before they're ready for a more premium bottle. It gives them something to experience.
Yes, and I don't want anybody, if you love Yellowtail, go for it. I love that for you. It is a fantastic wine. But you're right, everybody has to start somewhere. I started with a wine called Honeymoon that you could buy at Trader Joe's for $4.99 a bottle. I mentioned it to my mom the other day, and she said, don't even say the name. But you start somewhere. And so with the RIT classes, students will be like, I do not like this dry wine, and I cannot figure out why. And my question will be, do you drink coffee? How do you then take your coffee? Do you put sugar in it? Do you put milk in it? Did you start with a lot of sugar and milk in your coffee and now you drink it black? Because that's the same thing, right? We started someplace and then we evolved because we learned we learned what we liked, and over time maybe what we liked changed as well. And so I don't ever want anybody to think that you cannot drink Yellowtail. Please do, enjoy it. But then maybe pick up something else and just experiment, because that's part of the point.
I'll also add just the importance of wine over centuries and centuries as having a place at the table when people are coming together, whether that's, a family celebration, a funeral, a barbecue, just meeting someone from out of town and the importance of just a glass or two. I'm not talking like chugging 3 bottles in a night, right? But just like a glass or two. It takes the edge off. Maybe you don't know these people. And all of a sudden you are participating in this sharing experience that, the Romans sat around a table and did. And that's really cool. For me, at least. I like to think about it in that sense. Wine has been traded for centuries. It's been around a long time. I don't think it's going anywhere, even if we're in a period of retraction. So for me, there's a lot of that, the importance of wine as part of the meal, getting to know new people. I've met so many new people I would have never met. And then we're just sitting across from each other with a glass of wine in hand, and I'm listening to their life story. That's cool. So.
Yeah, great question. Anything else? Yep, we've got a question in the back there. Really running you around, Craig. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Where's the question?
All right, thank you. So we live in a digital age where technology is all about breaking down those geographical barriers and making our world smaller. But when we're talking about something like wineries, it's all about placemaking and the geography matters. So how do you use this tool that's made to break down those geographical barriers for something that's so geographically specific?
So it's less about the geography of it, but at the same, all these things kind of are a balancing act. At one point where you can connect, you're online, we're all on our phones all the time, a computer screen. I think there's a real hunger for people to have real experiences with someone sitting across from them. And like, I can, you're right there. And I think that's important. I think wine brings that back into focus. That being said, new technologies also get new people in your door. So, it's a balancing act. But for me, I do think there's an importance of this is a physical, real experience that you're tasting and talking to someone.
You're absolutely right about the geography being so important, especially for us in New York wine. And it is a balance of figuring out how to be in front of somebody and also communicate these things through your small cell phone. 680 Cellars on Cayuga Lake is doing a really nice job of putting out these really interesting informational videos about what's happening in the vineyard right now. And literally it'll be their winemaker, Ian, in the vineyard looking at a grapevine and saying, this is what's happening. We've had a lot of rain this year and here's how we're feeling about it. And I think being able to still give the visual, even though you're not right there, really opens up a whole level of understanding for consumers that we didn't have the opportunity to get before. And it's on social media, so you could be looking at that in any city, and maybe using it to plan your Finger Lakes vacation one day. So I think it's really incredible. It's an incredible tool, not just for marketing, but for information sharing. I think that obviously as an educator, I'm biased here, but I think that there's such importance in educating our consumers about where our product comes from. And I found myself sitting on a panel once and my fellow panel mates said that we shouldn't even waste our time educating our consumers. And it was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Because there's so much to learn about what we're creating. And it doesn't have to be nerdy or a beat over the head, but it really does help you have an appreciation for why things are the way they are, why they're priced the way they are, the number of people that are working behind the scenes to create these things. And that I think is invaluable when it comes to what social media can do for these producers. And even your newsletter, even your email, maybe it's a mailer with a photo, it can be anything, but I think just communicating place through a marketing material is invaluable.
There's a concept called edutainment, so educational entertainment, that is really catching fire right now too. The idea of nurturing social media and storytelling and educating in a way that doesn't feel like dry toast, right? So you can be entertaining about it. Any other questions for right now? Yes.
I'm pretty sure you know this, but wine and the arts mix very well, right? So, but we haven't talked about, I haven't heard you say, the arts and wine, what is the relationship? Do you see those two as a great complement of each other, and what are you doing about it?
So what pops to my mind is we're a licensed microfarm winery within higher education. So that's something to wrap your head around. But we have had a partnership from the start, our very first vintage of 2010, with our graphic arts classes and students. So our student winemakers give these student graphic arts students ideas of what they think they want to see on a wine label, right? And then the artists, they go off and they figure out, and they may not even have had a drop of wine. They don't even know a red from a white, right? They don't know that Riesling is white. But they're going to create a beautiful label that will be on that current vintage. And it has been amazing to see the evolution of where the students and the art program has brought our wine labels. It's a wonderful partnership, but yeah, the arts are everywhere, and wine is everywhere with the arts, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And we have taken a similar approach actually with pairing our wines with local artists and their pieces. You're absolutely right that wine is such a creative force, and that's one of the things I like best about winemaking. So to acknowledge that each year in our portfolio, if we have something special, something that's especially creative for us as winemakers, we do a smaller bottling of it, and we call that our art series. So that it's not going to be the same every year. We don't know what it will be each year. So that's one kind of free form of expression for the winemakers. But with that, for the art for each label, we pair with local winemakers local to Keuka Lake for us. So we worked with a potter once, and she did like a kind of a mosaic of shards of pottery that was then photographed. We've worked with painters. We do it every year. So that's kind of a 3-piece art series that we do.
And I should mention the Smith Opera House, which you should all check out. So that's right in Geneva, and the local breweries and local wineries have events with our local opera house. So a sparkling night, it's in February, you know, the weather's pretty gross around here, but for those that live here, we love it. You know, it might be snowy, it's cold, it's a masquerade, and just pairing with our local arts organizations to support them, who then support us. It's very symbiotic. I know you were on the board a couple years ago, right? Yeah, and just kind of like bringing great brain power to these arts organizations that find themselves surrounded by wineries and breweries and cideries.
I think the industry in and of itself is also art, right? It's the art of winemaking. And so, you know, everyone's kind of approaching things a little differently in that process.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is the art of winemaking in the same way that we talk about culinary arts. Wine is art in that way too. And what somebody's able, I feel like a broken record because I keep saying the same thing, so sorry. But what somebody is able to do in a challenging year for a bottle that you're willing to buy is no small feat. And that is art in and of itself. There is an Instagram account, I think it's FLX Bev Culture. Mm-hmm. And the most recent takeover was by Wes Andrew, who's the winemaker over at Atwater Vineyards. And he literally talks about how he thought he might be an artist one day. And then he learned that he actually is an artist in making his wine. And it's a really beautiful kind of 8-post series about what it is that he's doing in the cellar. And I think it's beautiful work that y'all do.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, last question for our panelists, and then we may have a couple minutes, depending on where we land, for another question or two from the audience. So last question for all of my friends up on stage here. What emerging opportunities do you see, whether that's new markets, new products, new ways of doing business, new partnerships, that could further strengthen a community's position as a leader in food and beverage innovation?
On the idea of partnership, we were actually talking about this a little bit this morning. There is a new group that's formed called Wineries Without Walls, and they're all micro producers who are sort of just kind of popping on the scene, trying to figure out how to make it work. They do not have tasting rooms, and you will see that wineries occasionally will be doing a pop-up at a different location, maybe at at the Welcome Center, or even at Apollo's Praise, or at Dr. Frank's winery. So there was an event that happened that brought all of these wineries together. Instead of doing these one-off pop-ups, there was a group of, I want to say about 8 of them together at one pop-up, and that created Wineries Without Walls. They've since grown and added a couple more. There's even a cidery without ceilings. And so I guess my point is, we talk a lot about the collegiality of this region, but we're sort of formalizing it in a way with programs like Wineries Without Walls, and it is giving more opportunity to new producers who might not have the ability to do as much. But when you've got 8 of them in a room, then all of a sudden everybody's showing up to support and learn about the product that you're making. And we even talked about how not all of them are creating everything. One woman does entirely sparkling wine, so she's able to, point to her neighbor when somebody asks her for red. And I think that just having this, community, formalizing it in this way, is really important to opening up new opportunity in this industry.
I think something that I've seen that has helped, promote growth in this region and find new frontiers, and that I think will continue to, is the idea of winemakers working abroad. And I'm, a prime example of that. I'm a bit biased, but it was something that I was pushed to do as a young, fledgling winemaker, pushed out the door, go experience a harvest in another part of the world, learn something, come back, bring those ideas back. And I obviously fell in love with that and ended up living abroad for a while. But even just doing 1 vintage, 2 vintages, Julia's done this as well. It's become kind of the new, I don't know, not normal, but a very much more normalized thing to do that rapidly brings back in new innovation, new ideas, different winemaking techniques, and new friendships and networks that you create with other winemakers, with other professionals around the world. From doing all this, I have friends literally all around the world that I can, call upon if I have a problem in the cellar and say, have you ever seen fruit like this? What did you do? And so you just rapidly transform the rate of growth by creating these global networks. And I think we've seen that a lot in the past 10 years with young people coming up through the industry and doing a lot of this traveling winemaking. And I think we'll continue to.
And to piggyback on that, there's the traveling for work, but as we've launched our winery, one thing that is really important to us is not to just sell our wines in New York State. So we're looking other states, which every state is different for compliance and can be a real headache, but also looking abroad. So right now, obviously, it's not a great time to be exporting. And we are still working with a really great importer from the UK. London's a strong market for us. There's other markets that we have relationships established with importers. In Denmark, in Sweden, they're a little hesitant just given tariffs. But those are relationships that we're going to keep up because we've all seen the world change and it ebbs and it flows, and hopefully 4 or 5 years from now, we can pursue those relationships again. And a little thing that I've done for about 8 years now, whenever we go anywhere, we pack a case of wine. It doesn't matter. And if we have a great meal at a restaurant, we have a bottle in one of our backpacks and we leave, whatever tip we're gonna leave, and we leave a bottle of wine. And we've connected to so many people with that one case of wine we bring on every single vacation. There's a quirky winery in Tuscany that they started ordering some of our wines through London, and we order a case of their wine every year, and we're always very excited and send photos. And that's the organic growth for me. It's 12 bottles once or twice a year, but we've met and connected with so many wonderful people around the world doing that.
Lovely. We're at time, so I want to thank everyone, my panelists, for great contribution to today's discussion, and the audience as well for asking such great questions. If we can have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm your host, Maureen Ballatori. Spilled Salt is an Agency 29 production. Agency 29 is a brand building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture brands. Learn more at agency29.com. For more information about the podcast, visit spilledsaltpodcast.com. Use that website to send me questions or recommendations for future guests. I always love hearing from you. Spilled Salt is available anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.